Hello friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're going to take a look at this full moon that's coming up on Monday morning, which is another powerful lunation. All these lunations lately have been so powerful, just from the end of last year, right? All the spring, this spring of 2016 is a really powerful time. And we'll take a look at that and look ahead a little bit to March. So you might want to also subscribe to the YouTube channel. We like you to do that because that way you can keep in touch with what we're up to and see new productions as they come. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this full moon. Well, here we have this full moon, which is in Pisces, the sun being in Pisces, coming up on Monday. And the sun being in Pisces opposite the moon in Virgo. And, you know, with the sun in Pisces approaching its conjunction with Neptune in Pisces a few more days, about 6 more days, we're actually coming into a very dreamy time, but it's also a very practical time. So we have a combination of ingredients. We must be careful, we must be conservative in our approach, because we could go off the deep end if we're too far out there. But yet we have a certain dreamy and optimistic attitude now, with a strong presence of Jupiter, which I've been talking about, with also strong presence of Neptune in Pisces. And what we're seeing, though, is that in addition to these factors, the moon opposite in Virgo, this is an earth sign, very practical, and also we have a strong presence of Saturn right now, which gets even stronger next month. So this is very interesting because there's an old Arab proverb actually, which comes to mind: trust in God, but tie up your camel. And that really applies to the situation that we're in right now. That we have to be careful and watch what we're doing, and yet we're also very aware of the possibilities, the very optimistic, very far out there possibilities for radical change to take place, which would be to our advantage to maybe relieve some of the dysfunctional situation we find ourselves in, either personally or in the culture. So this is a very important time, and it's a time for us to pay attention. It's a time for us to be very aware of the changes that are going on within us and what we can see all around us as we near that greater time of acceptance of the definite necessity for change. The Uranus-Pluto square, which I've been talking about, of course, we can see here Pluto at 16, Uranus at 17, almost 18. It is separating now, and it will be moving further away than 2 degrees, so the intensity of the aspect is lessening, but the consciousness around the aspect is increasing, and that's a very important distinction to make, that in this latter part of the decade, the latter part of these teens, these turbulent teens, we do have a situation that is becoming more and more evident to everyone about what needs to change and how we must move in the direction of change. And in this connection, it's important to note that Pluto is in Capricorn now, but it's also in close connection with Saturn, which is the ruler of Capricorn, reflecting also the structure, the solidity of the earth environment, what we have beneath our feet, what we operate in every day, the physical realm. So there's a strong pattern of change that's happening with regard to what our fundamental beliefs are, Saturn and Sagittarius, what our fundamental rules of the game are for our own life. And this is reflected in the cycles of Saturn. By the way, the reason I say that Saturn and Pluto are so closely connected is not only they're forming semi-sextile, which is getting closer and closer these next few days, but also, if you look at the parallel, which I've shown before, Pluto at 20 and 51, 20 degrees and 51 minutes in a negative direction of latitude, zodiacal latitude, which is actually called the declination. It's not actually called zodiacal latitude, but it's in that direction as opposed to longitude. And then that was 2051, this is 2058, so still very close together, within just less than 10 minutes all the way through this month, all the way through next month as well. They don't move very fast, and Saturn is stationing, so it's moving even slower. So these two are just sitting at the same degree in the sky of declination, and therefore they're connected in a way that really resembles a conjunction, even though they're separated by 30 degrees. So we have a very strong Saturn presence, which gets even stronger next month. And therefore, we have, one of the key words for Saturn is responsibility. And Saturn is kind of an interesting animal. Well, I say animal, but it's an interesting symbol in our astrological world because it really strides the distance between both the inner planets that represent the planets known to the ancients, that represent this physical world that we inhabit, and the outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Saturn is often considered an outer planet. So there's a way that Saturn participates in this notion of change and transformation. Saturn is where we're stuck, but it's also where we have the chance to get greater consciousness about that and to move beyond it. And very important to recognize that Saturn is such a powerful factor. It's a place that we can transcend our previous limitations. It does represent those limitations, but it also represents the consciousness and the responsibility to transcend and to come into a better integration with ourselves. So very important that Saturn is active now, and very important as well that Uranus and Pluto is still active. So we have in this full moon and also in the general configurations of these times a great deal of transformational impulse, which is what this astrology is all about, is it not? We talk about it all the time, the transformation that we need to make in our lives, because really our lives are about change. Life is change. Everything is always breaking down, building up, new forms coming. And yet we are resistant to change because we're afraid. We're afraid that something that we know, even though it may not be so great, is a lot safer than something we don't know. So there's that resistance, which is sometimes well-founded. We can't just launch off into outer space, jump off the edge of a cliff without thinking. We have to also watch where we're going and be careful and conservative so that our changes will last. Sometimes there could be a flash in the pan that won't last, and what we really want is something that will build on itself, which is Saturn, and be fundamentally productive as a change that we can really take forward into the future, into a meaningful future for ourselves. Well, another thing is that Saturn in Sagittarius means taking our beliefs more seriously. We are in a place of inherited beliefs when we start out, are we not? I mean, when we come in as children, when we come in as even young adults, up till the first Saturn return, as a matter of fact, we very much depend on what we learned in our early conditioning, what we learned at our mother's knee, so to speak. As we develop into our own individual selfhood and our adult lives, we do realize that that has to come from within ourselves, what we believe. And that's a process that's very important now, very familiar to us now as we're going through these changes. Well, another thing about this configuration is that Mercury is now in Aquarius, and that's a whole different thing than Mercury in Capricorn has been. So there's a lot of forward looking in our consciousness now, and that goes along with Uranus, which rules Aquarius. So, and also Mercury is coming to that sextile with Saturn. So it does partake of both these elements of forward looking and also conservation of energy, being practical in our approach, as indicated also by the Virgo full moon. Well, we might wonder also, while we see this combination of Saturn and Pluto, we might also wonder about this combination we see too of Jupiter and Eris. I've been talking about that. Jupiter is now moving backwards, so a little bit further back. Not quite so close. It was very close, and it's in conjunct to Eris. But Eris amplifies something and makes it stronger, and Jupiter is a very strong presence right now, as well as being the ruler of Saturn, and as well as we shall see as being opposite the new moon that's coming in Pisces, which is also where Chiron is located right now. So there's a lot of Jupiter as well as a lot of Saturn, and we do have that sense of the social matrix changing, which is indicated by Jupiter-Saturn in combination. Every 20 years we get the conjunction, and that is a particularly strong time of social activism, social awareness, societal awareness, where we see some of the directions that society is taking, and we can try to adjust that direction. And we're in a period right now of societal adjustment where some of these problems are being looked at more seriously and try to find practical solutions to them. There's some optimism involved. There's some foot dragging involved, the reaction against the change. And we see all that around us in the society. We can see it in our own lives as well. So very important times right now. Well, I'd like to show you that new moon because I do have it here. And that's the new moon of March 8th. It's coming up pretty soon. And this cycle that we're in now, oops, here we are. So this cycle that we're in now kind of prepares the way for this new moon to come. And what a powerful new moon it is. We can see that the new moon takes place at 18 degrees 56, almost 19 degrees of Pisces, almost exactly opposed to Jupiter at 18 degrees of Virgo. And we have as well Saturn now at 16 degrees, while Pluto is at 17. So these are all very similar degrees, 18 and 19, 17, 16. They're all very close together. And so we have a very strong presence of both Pluto and Saturn in this coming new moon, which is incidentally also an eclipse. So this new moon in Pisces is a solar eclipse conjunct also Chiron. So, and here we have Uranus at 18 degrees. So all of these outer planets, including Saturn, are pulled into the mix of this new moon that's coming up. And this is really important times and something for us to be aware of, to be beginning to prepare for. So we'll talk more about the new moon as it comes closer in our next edition. Getting back to the chart that we were looking at before, the full moon chart, we just want to recognize a few things that are coming up. That as Mercury gets closer to its square, I'm sorry, not square, but sextile with Saturn, there is going to be a little bit more of a serious emphasis on what we're thinking. And over these next 6 days, as the Sun gets into conjunction with Neptune, we're going to have that dreamy quality. So both of these are coming up. Both that sense of dreamy possibility is emphasized by Jupiter, which is very powerful right now, and also our sense of practicality as represented by Saturn, that no matter how far we fly, we still have to keep in touch with the Earth. We still have to keep in touch with the grounding that's necessary for us to really go forward in a way that's self-sustaining, that's practical, that makes change that could happen. The fear of change is also represented by Saturn, so we do see that polarization right now in the society and maybe in our own selves. We feel like we can make the change, but we don't really know if we really can make the change. We see it as a possibility. Can we see it as a reality? Can we make it happen? Can we have the faith in ourselves? There's a great line from Shakespeare, from Hamlet. When Hamlet is contemplating action, he says, there's that fear that we have of, sometimes we would rather face those ills we have and be with those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er by the pale cast of thought, by which he means fear, and enterprises of great pith and moment turn awry and lose the name of action. And this is where we have to make a delicate balance between hanging on to what we've got and chucking it and moving ahead with what we really need to move toward if we are to really become ourselves and become the persons that we know in our hearts that we can be. Okay, well, that's it for this week, and we'll see you in another couple. I'll have a little closing statement. Well, I always like to talk about resources as we close. And the resource for Saturn, the really terrific one, is Liz Green's book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil, in which she talks about both the light and the dark sides of Saturn. Saturn related to the word Satan, considered a malefic by the traditional astrologers, also is full of light when we turn around and understand what our true responsibilities are to become, more conscious, fully conscious human beings. And she articulates that viewpoint quite clearly. Another really great resource for that too is the Jupiter-Saturn conference lectures that she did with Stephen Arroyo. So it's Stephen Arroyo and Liz Green, published shortly after their conference in 1981 by CRCS Press. And then two, Stephen Arroyo's book, which is the main book of his, which is Astrology, Karma, and Transformation. Terrific book. Also goes into Saturn in many ways of looking at it, productive ways. And for that matter, also Isabel Hickey's book, Astrology, A Cosmic Science. You can't go wrong with that book. It's terrific, full of wisdom at every page you turn. And she also mentions the dark and the light side, the two faces of Saturn, in her presentation. So this is an idea that humanistic astrologers have been carrying forward for quite a while now. And of course, I always like to mention my own book about Eris, which covering this new archetype, this planet. I call it a planet that is very prominent in many charts of paradigm shifters, feminists, people that have to do their own thing, articulate their own point of view. And that title is The 10th Planet, Revelations from the Astrological Eris. And then in Air Software and Time Passages, the software I created 20 years ago now, that also has some very profound interpretations of both Saturn and Pluto in the way they operate in the natal chart and in transit by transit. And that is available also from our site, from astrograph.com. So that's it for a couple of weeks. Hope you have a good time, the transition into March, and we'll talk soon. Take care.